going to offer? What's it going to look like? Talk about dosage, talk about frequency, all of those pieces of the puzzle, and making sure you know what service it is that you're planning to offer to meet those needs of your target population. And what's it going to take to offer that, right? What are the resources? Oftentimes this is called outputs. I realize this isn't that's not in this part here on this one, my apologies. But oftentimes this is called outputs. What is this really going to take to get this out there for folks? And so you want to make sure that you are identifying those resources that you need to carry out the services. What money is always key, right? How are you going to pay for this? But it really is so much more than that. What space do you need to offer the service? What does that need to look like? What needs to be in the space in terms of seating or tables or just is this home based and but are there key pieces that you need to do your home visits? What are those? How do you get those? How do you transport those to and from that home visit? That type of thing. What other materials do you need? Is there a curriculum? Is there worksheets, workbooks, handouts? How are you going to, advertise? What materials do you need to do that, to get the word out, to get people to participate? All of those types of things. And then what staff do you need? What do those staff need to look like in terms of training and support? What resources might they need? Is there ongoing training that they need to participate in? What does the supervision of that staff look like? Do you need to purchase curriculum or other items? Depending on the curriculum, you could have to purchase per client, so that those pieces of paper are gold and you've got to be super careful with them. Or is it something that you can copy? And if it is something you can copy, great. Where's the copy machine? How are you going to be able to do that? What office support do you need to conduct this? How are you going to enter the data after whatever you've done, to talk about how that went? All of those kinds of pieces of the puzzle are those things that I'll tell you so often, when we come in and we help programs that are maybe struggling, it's sort of in this resources piece that they're like, well, we didn't realize we would need X, Y, Z, because they really didn't sort of spend time really digging into this and thinking through all of those pieces. And so there was some critical component that they forgot to include. Maybe they don't have the money for, and maybe they didn't realize they'd need, that sort of thing. And so this, well, it sounds super basic and sounds like, one of those things, well, of course, we need resources. And we know what we need. It really does have some value here to spend a little time digging around, getting a little dirty in this, and really just making sure that you've got what you need to be truly effective at this. And if you don't have it, then thinking through, how do I get this? For example, if you don't have the space you need, right? Say maybe you really need to be able to accommodate a group of 20. You want to do a parent support group. You want to be able to offer it to a fairly large group. But within your organization, you don't have a space that would really adequately serve 20 folks in that kind of a group. So, okay, awesome. If you don't have it, can you get it? Is there a church? Is there another organization within the community where you might be able to access that space on a regular basis that would allow you to go ahead and offer that? So really, sort of beginning to think, if we don't have it in-house, can we get it? And what might that look like? And what do we need to have to make that happen? So, perfect. Now let's jump into outcomes. This is where it really starts to get fun, right? We think about outcomes in a little bit different way. And again, like I had said a bit ago, what we do is participant and not program focused. When we think about this, program evaluation and participant evaluation are two different things, and while they should work hand in hand, the logic model that we're encouraging folks to really begin to design is about your participants and the change you want to see in them. And so the hope is that you're writing outcomes that really are identifying a change, a movement, some sort of difference within the participants that participate in your program. What's going to be different for them in terms of an attainment or a movement towards of an attitude, a behavior, a belief? What has changed for the people you serve as a direct result of the services that you offer? And that's, what can be really sort of important, I think, for people to examine and look at. It's that piece of the puzzle that says, how our families changed, how our families, ideally better for their interactions with us. And that direct result piece is really sort of one of those key scenarios there, because if you can never say, of course, with absolute certainty that the outcomes were achieved, based on your interaction, but given your services, is there a link that is logical and gives credibility to the notion that you've contributed to those outcomes? And that's what's really important. It's tough in the work that we do to prove change, but it's really one of those pieces where if we're thoughtful about how we design our outcomes and put things together, then we'll really begin to know whether or not that's the piece that makes sense and fits. So again, I'm going to just pause for a moment and see if anybody has any questions as they have gone through this content, or has any pieces that they want to talk about.
Edie, can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Abby.
Great. I don't have any questions, but I want to let folks know. I believe Allie has muted everybody, but you should be able to mute and unmute yourself. We just ask if you want to unmute and add to the conversation, please feel free to do so. Just mute yourself again when you're finished so we're not hearing a ton of background noise. Thanks.
Thanks, Abby. Okay, well, I am just going to move along, not hearing anybody. Just trying to scroll through the video feed real quick, although it looks like almost everybody's turned off their cameras as well. So I can't tell if anybody's trying to jump in. So, all right. So next up, let's talk about then the envisioning change. And this is so incredibly important as you're thinking about your outcomes. And what I really want you guys to be doing is thinking about this. In an ideal world, what are the one or two things that would be different for families? If you could only pick, two, what are the two changes that would be different for families for interacting with your program? And that's really the place to get started with and really think. If you're successful, what do they believe, know, or have as a result of interacting with you? What is different? And this is really where I think the rubber meets the road in this. When we begin to think about working with families and really try things different for them, as parents or as contributors to the community or whatever the case may be, in the services you offer, what is that piece that makes the most sense there? And that's the thing that, is so exciting, is really trying to that. And so I would ask, you guys to really take a moment and think about that. What are those things that would be different within the organization, the family that you serve within your organization, if you were able to do this in a perfect world? And I'm just going to give you a minute of me just, not talking, to kind of jot that down on some paper and really think about that. Okay, excellent. So moving on, let's go ahead and begin to think about different types of outcomes in terms of short-term, intermediate, and long-term. Now, again, this might be that place where you felt like our model looked a little different than maybe something you were familiar with before, because it probably is. Hello? Did somebody have a question? No? Okay. So for us, short-term, intermediate, and long-term is less about, real concrete timeframes and much more about the type of outcome that you're writing. An example there is short-term. For short-term, for us, those are really engagement or learning outcomes. Folks really beginning to change the way they think about something, or not. I apologize, not change the way they think about something. Gain some understanding in a topic that maybe they weren't as familiar with before, or to really begin to engage them in a process. And sort of just getting them in the door. And that's for us what short-term really looks like. We don't necessarily, tie those to time frames because, sometimes engaging can take a while. Sharing of knowledge and really beginning folks on a learning process can take a while. And so it really sort of depends on that piece, what that might look like. Intermediate for us is more about practice. Folks beginning to take that knowledge, that new information that you've shared with them, and beginning to try it on, see how it fits for them. Does this make sense for what I do? An example of that might be that, your short-term outcomes where that, participants will learn about effective disciplinary techniques that don't involve spanking. Okay, awesome. So they learned about it, right? The intermediate outcome for that would be them beginning to practice that. And so that might look like participants will begin to practice the use of timeout in their own home, right? So that's pretty clear. They learned about those alternative techniques, and now they're beginning to try it. They don't know yet whether or not it's going to be a perfect fit for them, this new knowledge that they've gained, how that might look in their family, all of those things. They don't know those pieces yet, but they're working on it. And then for us, long-term is about integration. And I'll just be really honest with you. In the work that we do with the families we have and the kind of funding we have, most of us will never get to that place where we know whether or not integration has truly occurred for our families. It's tough. Integration is about that, we're no longer trying it on. We're no longer seeing if it fits. It's just a part of what we do. That's a tough place to get in the type of work that we do. An example of that might be that, participants utilize timeout and other techniques for effective discipline within their home. It's really about that we understand this, we do this, we don't even, sort of have to think about it anymore. It's like, for example, nutrition. We might have some families come in and we're working with them around some nutrition education, helping them understand that, I feed my kids, a healthy diet. They get Cheetos, they get, gummies, those fruit gummy things that my kids love that I won't ever let them get. I'm the mean mom about this, but anyway, so, and they think that they're doing, really well with the things that they're doing. Oh, it says it has vitamin C on the package. It's got to be good for them, right? And then you do some work with them, you do some education, you help them understand, what a healthy diet really does look like, and they begin to learn that. They begin to try it on and practice it. They, at the grocery store, maybe are, beginning to make some different choices. They're beginning to bring more fruits and vegetables in the home, but maybe the fruit gummies still come because, it says fruit, that sort of thing. that long-term integration is around, they don't even think about it anymore. It's just practice. They always have a salad with dinner. A third of the plate is protein, and 2/3 of the plate is vegetables. It's that sort of practice or integration piece that we rarely get to see. But for us, that's really sort of what determines the short, intermediate, and long-term pieces. And that really is driven by your outcomes. Maybe your outcomes really are just about, helping families gain knowledge. And if that's the case, then awesome. Then, for us, you'd be writing all short-term outcomes. And there's not a problem within that there, but just really beginning to understand what you're trying to accomplish and what that might look like is, I think, key. It looks like I had a question come in, and so I'm trying to get to that. McKinley, yes, absolutely. I think it can be applied there. Like, for example, let me think. McKinley asked if this can be applied to adolescent pregnancy prevention, and without a doubt it can. So let me give me 2 seconds. I've only had like a third of a cup of coffee this morning. So for example, if you're working with adolescents to prevent future pregnancy, it's really about, so if they're coming in the door, they're learning things, in this day and age, we'd love to think that everybody knows how you get pregnant. But being the mom of teenagers and some younger kids, I can tell you that there's some misinformation out there for sure. So really sharing with them information about, how you can get pregnant, what that might look like. I think that there's still, some of those myths floating around about, can you get pregnant when you're in your period and all that kind of stuff. And really, beginning to share that information, educating them in those pieces. And that might be all that your program is, McKinley, is education. And, that's awesome. That may be where your outcomes would stop, but maybe not. Maybe it's around practicing as well. Maybe they're beginning some intermediate pieces like, beginning to try some of the new information that you've given them around safe sex practices or, effective means of preventing and that sort of thing. And so without a doubt, you could integrate that there as well. So excellent. Any other questions or comments at this point before I sort of jump into a structure and how to write outcome statements? No? Okay, I gotta get my screen to go right. Okay, so for us, it's a pretty simple structure that we use, and we get some questions sometimes about this structure, and this is really, it's just about making it simple for you. I'll come in and I'll look at logic models, and people have got like these broad, sweeping sort of 3 and 4, bullet statements. And I'm like, it didn't have to be that complicated. And in fact, making it that complicated is part of what's making things so hard on you. So really sort of trying to take that step back and understand what those might look like. And so a who will do what structure makes that, really nice. It helps keep it more clean and concise. It makes it simple. And if you have more than one who, more than one thing they will do, more than one what, then you've got too much in your statement. So really using this who will do what piece is nice and really sort of makes things simple for folks to begin to look at and take those pieces. So, the example here is participants will know where to access basic healthcare information for their children. And so this is where I would typically ask, is that a short-term, an intermediate, or a long-term? But of course, it's a little difficult for us to share in that piece. And so I'll just give you the answer there. It is a short-term, right? Because they're just, they know where to access basic healthcare information. We didn't say they are accessing it. We didn't say they tried to use the information. We just said they know where to go. So that's a knowledge piece, which means it's a short-term. So excellent. I'm going to now just pause again. We're getting ready to go into indicators. And so I want to double check with outcomes and make sure everybody feels comfortable with that content and sort of feels like they could write an outcome statement for themselves if, should they need to, which hint you will at some point need to. Any questions? You can use the chat like McKinley did, which was super effective, or you can also unmute and ask a question. All right, good deal. Well, not hearing or seeing anything, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward. So let's talk about indicators. So if outcomes are desired change, which is what we talked about, right? Then an indicator is that evidence of change. Indicators are those pieces that tell us that outcome has come up and really looks like we need it to, and what that needs to be. Sorry, question just came up, so I wanted to make sure before I got too deep into this. Yes, you will have access to the slides. We'll be happy to email them out. No problem, because I don't think in Zoom there's a download option. So we'll definitely make sure that they get out to folks. Within the program beyond what the funder determined. So here's the thing, Annette, and so Annette's question was really around, is this meant for programs to set outcomes and goals within their program beyond what the funders determine? And so what the key is here around that piece that I would say is that understanding your own outcomes, whether you've written them or someone else has, is super crucial, because if outcomes don't fit your target population and who you're working with, the services that you offer, then that's not a good fit for you in terms of what that looks like, and that's what we're trying to avoid. And so having that really deep understanding around the kinds of outcomes you can expect to achieve and the families you work with is just super crucial, because oftentimes what we'll see when we come in and if things aren't going well, right, is that there's a problem with either the type of program that was chosen for the outcomes they're hoping to achieve, or that, they attempted to fit a square peg into a round hole, right? And that's what happens if you don't have like that great piece behind you. And so what we're really trying to do, we've been working with PCA Iowa and looking at how to really help you guys move to the next level in terms of the type of data you're collecting, your understanding with families, and then your responses to the RFAs or RFPs that come out. So really helping to make sure that folks that are applying for services and programs are a good fit for the funding streams. That's not to say that any of you are not, but my belief and my tenet here is that everybody can do better about this. And so we're really just wanting you guys to have a much deeper understanding of how that correlation goes between the selection of services, whether you picked it or it was prescribed by a funding stream, and how that all fits together with outcomes. So I hope that sort of clarifies that piece. And certainly we can talk a little bit more about that as we continue to move forward. But I would say that based on my interactions, and Julie and Abby, you guys feel free to bop in here at any point, is that there will be a point where you're going to be asked to write logic models, that you're going to be able to write outcome statements that are going to demonstrate what you anticipate the changes to be within your organization based on all of these factors. So even if you're not doing it now, there will be a point down the road that you're going to be asked to do this, and we're trying to give you knowledge and information to make that happen. Okay, good deal. There's one more question that came in. Use the PFS to determine if we're reaching our outcomes. However, our participants think they're doing fine. This doesn't help us determine. Yes, the whole pre-test, post-test thing. Yeah, so that is absolutely a thing. And actually, I can talk about that a little here in just a minute. We're going to talk about measurement for like a half a second today. But basically, that is a problem, and that might be a problem with how you're collecting your data. And I don't know how many of you know this, but the Protective Factor Survey is actually a tool from the Friends National Center, which is where I work. And we're aware of this, and we actually have some recommendations around that. About how to collect data a little bit differently. And so actually, if you want to reach out to me individually, my email's at the end of this piece, and we can talk about that more in depth. But there are ways to make sure. And the other scenario might be that your outcomes aren't a good fit for that survey. And so really thinking through some of those pieces too. So excellent. Okay, any more questions? Thank you guys. I prefer interactive sessions, and I know sometimes it's hard for these pieces. So before we dive into indicators, any more questions? So Sue, we will talk about that in some today. We'll talk about that probably much more in our next session next month in terms of that piece. And I think we'll have time here in a minute to actually dive into it a little bit further around measurement without a doubt. So awesome. Okay, perfect. So I am going to, indicators are that evidence of change. It's that thing that makes us know something was different. And the easiest way I know to cover this is to just be able to show you some examples. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bounce now to some examples. So you'll see here that in the big blue box at the top of the slide, there it says parents demonstrate knowledge of how to provide a safe home environment for their children. So the who in that statement is parents. They're going to demonstrate knowledge of what? How to provide a safe home environment for their children. So you'll see that sort of follows that format. So that's our outcome statement. And so since they're demonstrating knowledge, for us that would be intermediate because they're beginning to practice it. They're trying to show that they know these things. So some examples of some indicator statements for that there might be 80% of the participants can name 6 features of a child-safe house. 80% can identify at least 6 common household hazards. 80% can describe how to eliminate or reduce at least 6 household hazards. So, pretty straightforward. I do want to talk about the 80% piece here for just a second. So that's what's called a benchmark, right? When you begin assigning percentages, numbers to indicator statements, that's benchmarking. That's demonstrating a proficiency level. For me, percentages are super challenging. I'll just say that. I think our practice, our effort should be towards 100%, and that when we ascribe a number that's less than that, we're sort of saying we're okay with not everybody sort of getting this. So having said that, I also know reality and that, there's a good chance that sort of no matter what technique you're using or what you're doing, that things may not be the piece of the puzzle that might need to happen. I get that, totally get that. So having said that, you need to set benchmarks. Have a reason for the net percentage you set. Don't just pull a number out of the air. If you really don't know what you might anticipate, say you're offering something new, you're not sure, ask your funder for an opportunity to have a period of time where you're just measuring to get a sense, right? And so that way you know that number, that piece of the puzzle that you're setting has some sort of meaning. And I'll just use an example from Friends that we did. We have an online portal that the states can use to help assist them put together their reports and applications. This is a new thing that came out 2 or 3 years ago. We had no idea what the utilization was going to look like. We did not know what that might be. And so really trying to think about those things, we just basically let the first year happen, let the first integration happen. I had a number in my head of how much I wanted to see happen, but I didn't put it out there. And then once we sort of set that initial benchline and we saw, oh, awesome, 60% of folks utilized it. Great. Now that we know our sort of baseline intervention, how do we then push ourselves to continue to grow that number, to encourage, folks to be able to use that system. So I encourage you to do that as well. If it's something new, if you don't know what the integration or knowledge development, whatever the case may be around your outcome is going to be, to not just pick a number, but really have some sort of purpose or meaning behind that number that you do pick. So this is fairly straightforward in terms of indicators. Indicators are those things that are super easy to demonstrate. Like, for example, 80% of participants can describe how to eliminate or reduce at least 6 household hazards. That's fairly straightforward. You're probably using a measurement tool that talks about household hazards, and they're telling you that they know how to eliminate or reduce those, right? Or maybe you did an initial walkthrough in their house. You identified those household hazards, and you're going back to see if they've eliminated or reduced those. You're using a checklist that you use going into the home. You're marking those down, and you can tally those and come up with those numbers. So that's fairly straightforward, pretty easy to measure. Does that make sense? Does that give you guys a sense of what I mean between the relationships for outcomes and indicators? I was looking at a couple items popped in on chat, so I'm just kind of trying to look through those. Okay, so we don't seem to have any questions there. Yeah, Erin, we won't be covering needs assessment today, as I think it was Abby already indicated. If you do have some questions around that, I'd be happy to visit with you offline about that and give you some resources around those pieces. And if that enough of you guys identify that as a need, it's certainly something we can cover in a future session. So, good deal. All right, well, I'm going to assume you understand the relationship between outcomes and indicators, and how indicators just, are that concrete piece that allows you to measure. I want to talk a little bit now about some of those challenges in evaluating outcomes. And one of those is that piece that we had talked a little bit about before in terms of the protective factor survey, and that whole pre-test, post-test thing. So we'll get that here in just a second. So couple of the challenges that we see most frequently in the type of work that we do is first and foremost what I talked about, showing long-term growth within a short-term and very rigid time frame. And then also the piece that we sometimes want to claim responsibility for preventing negative outcomes or things that didn't happen. So what do I mean by that? I mean that, we're in the prevention of child abuse and neglect, right? But it's almost impossible to say that you have prevented child abuse and neglect with any sort of certainty, with any sort of clarity. So why is that? Well, because we all know the risk factors, right? We all know those families, those things that are present that may or may not indicate a family is at high risk for abuse or neglect. We know those things. Without intervention, do we know that family would have in fact abused or neglected their children? No, we don't. Because we also know those families that just sort of continue to hang on and stay in there and maintain without any intervention. And so we really can't claim that responsibility that we, in fact, prevented child abuse or neglect, short of reaching out, stopping someone's hand from striking someone. So those are some of those challenges that really come when we are working with evaluating outcomes. The other piece there is around that whole, sometimes families don't know what they don't know, right? And that's why they're interacting with you to begin with. And that once they gain some knowledge, once they develop some information that they didn't have before, that suddenly they have an understanding of why things maybe aren't the way they thought they were. And so that's really where sometimes doing that initial pre-test can skew some of your evaluation results. We call it families don't know what they don't know, right? And so I know that typically folks do, especially I think probably everybody on the phone is doing the protective factor survey. I think Iowa requires that as a pre-post. Sorry guys, my allergies are going crazy.
Edie, we do require that for our parent development and home visitation. And then our 2 crisis care programs utilize the PFS2 retrospective version.
Oh, okay, cool. So at least some of you on the phone may be familiar with the retrospective version, and that's really sort of how you can fix some of that we don't know what we don't know at the beginning thing is a retrospective. So a retrospective, for those who don't know, is a pre-post model that's all offered at post. So how does that work? You give them a survey sort of at the end at that post time frame, and the questions in the survey are provided in 2 different ways, and you ask them to think back. So the first question would be, before I participated in this program, I understood what a healthy diet was. And they'll rank themselves, on the Likert scale. And then right underneath that, it would say, now, after having participated in this program, I understand what a healthy diet is, and they rank themselves. So they sort of think back, and that can really help with some of that we didn't know what we didn't know sort of thing. So there's some scenarios that can help if you are required to do a traditional pre and post. There are some things there that you can do. And I think that I know Julie and I have talked about this in the past, and I apologize, Abby, I don't remember if you and I have had this conversation as well. You can offer a traditional pretest, and then at post you can offer the retrospective, and then you can compare those retrospective pre answers to the traditional pre and see the kind of differences you're having there, and see if that is in fact some of the challenges you have. And then, if you're determining that's the piece, then, that's usually the case for moving towards a true retrospective. But that's sort of the easiest way to solve sort of that particular challenge in evaluating outcomes, is moving in that direction. And so that might be a piece for you to consider. And I know you guys use Hornby Zeller to evaluate that, and they're certainly familiar with that particular model. And so, that might be a conversation we need to have about trying to help you guys get to a place where you feel like your outcomes are a good fit, you feel like you're measuring for the right thing, but maybe you're not seeing the kind of change you want. And that might be a piece of your evaluation puzzle to help that. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the next piece, which is understanding successful outcomes. So this is really sort of that crucial piece, and this is going to get us to some of what we were talking about before. Seeing successful achievement of your outcomes is related to many things. And we've talked a little bit about some of those. First and foremost, your population needs, right? Have you identified the appropriate needs for your population? And they're a good fit for the outcomes. In addition, does your agency have the capacity to do the work that you're proposing to do? And then finally, that third component here is are you adhering to program fidelity? And that really is crucial as well for outcome attainment. I'm going to talk for just a second about agency capacity, because I'll just be really honest with you. When we come in and see issues, and it's almost always in one of these three areas, and capacity is a big one. We oftentimes see programs attempting to implement programs that really are not working for them, and oftentimes it might be around that they just didn't have the capacity. Either they didn't have the infrastructure needed to participate. And when I'm talking infrastructure, it might be something as small as they don't have data entry capacity with regards to collecting the right information. It might be that they've selected a measurement tool that requires use of an online database, but their staff don't have regular access in the field to internet on their laptops. I mean, it can be that kind of thing. Staff qualifications. We saw one piece. This was an estate that we went to. We were working with. And they were really struggling. They were supposed to be implementing nurse-family partnership, but what we identified was that they couldn't get the nurses to fill the roles for the home visitor. And as we sort of dove a little deeper into that, we understood that they were actually one of the areas of the country that had the worst nursing shortage of anybody. And everybody kind of has a nursing shortage, but this particular area was considered an 85% no fill rate for nurses. And we're like, so probably that wasn't the best model to pick for that geographic location when they have such a critical need for nurses in general. Probably wasn't the best place to pick a nursing program to try to implement. So some of those pieces, the data collection piece, like I indicated, the evaluation, that can be a huge piece of the puzzle. Community support. This is one we've actually been working with a tribal entity that's actually in Kansas, and really looking at some of the work they're doing. And they started doing this fatherhood program. And actually Abby and heard some about this particular program in the fall that we were at, and he was really talking about the fact that initially the community, the tribal community, was not supportive of this fatherhood program. And once they sort of dove into it, it's because they originally hired a woman to run the fatherhood program. And they're like, the fathers in the community just didn't have the respect for her in terms of telling them how to be fathers, right? And so once they sort of made a staffing change there and brought in a father from within the tribal community to run the fatherhood program, all of a sudden their attendance is through the roof. They've got dads coming out of the woodwork. It was just that real piece, that made the difference within the community. Also, the level of funding. Are you getting the right amount of funding to do what you're proposing? Or are you hoping to just make it work, even though you really need $5,000 to do this and you're only getting $2,000? And that's problematic and can really see challenges with regards to implementation. In addition to all of those things that we've sort of talked about, there's the program adherence or program fidelity piece. And so, oftentimes folks believe that program fidelity is only for evidence-based practice. And I am here to say that is not true. That no matter what you're doing, whether it's a really rigid evidence-based model or it's something that you've designed, you should be practicing program fidelity. You should absolutely be implementing the program and its core components as it's intended. And if you're not measuring for that, then you're going to likely have problems down the road. And understanding that as a piece of the puzzle is just crucial. So program fidelity, program adherence has this role in implementation that's really unlike any other piece. It is the piece that can make or break a program in terms of the types of outcomes you see. And if you're not monitoring for program fidelity, if you're not paying attention to this, and you start to see bad outcomes, you might not know why. We'll dive into that here in just a minute. But I can't stress enough that this is not just about evidence-based programs. This really is, no matter what you're doing, if you've designed it, if you're taking something somebody else designed, if you're taking components of different pieces and putting them together, you should have an understanding of what this should look like, and you should be working to implement it in the way as intended, and then monitoring, measuring for that. A key piece of that is core components. So, ideally, if you're doing an evidence-based program, they've identified those core components, those pieces of the puzzle that have got to be present in order for you to see the outcomes you want to see. But I'll tell you that there are lots of evidence-based programs that don't have this core components in place, that they don't know which piece of their puzzle is the crucial piece. And oftentimes, so you're not going to know that. So really understanding what is supposed to happen, and if you do change anything, documenting that and monitoring for that, so that as you are monitoring your program fidelity and program adherence, you understand how that might be impacting the outcomes that you are seeing. So if you are not implementing, or even if you are, an evidence-based program, how do you know what's supposed to happen and what it's supposed to look like? And a program manual, you remember back to the house, like at the very beginning where I said I would talk a little bit about a program manual. So that's that piece that we're going to talk about here. So program manual is that in writing, that book that dictates sort of what we do and how we do it. It's a written set of policies and procedures, and we say it passes the join the circus test, right? So what's that? Well, if all the key people in your program decided to up and leave and go join the circus, could your program continue to run as planned? Do you have everything documented and written down in such a way so that someone could come in completely sort of unfamiliar with what you do and how you do it and continue to run it as it does now? And what we find is that most programs do not have this. And actually, if you don't have it and you want it, shoot me an email, because I actually have this really cool worksheet that helps you begin to write this. And it's pretty my worksheet is fairly simple, straightforward. It's a few pages, obviously, because this is a big thing, right? But it really helps you sort of get started on that. So if you feel like this isn't something you have, but you understand the need for, let me know, because I can help you out there. The reason program manuals are so important is because it really helps maintain that structure for your program. It helps you avoid program drift. What is program drift? Well, program drift is that thing that happens over time in most programs, especially if you're not doing fidelity or program adherence monitoring, especially if you aren't just sort of taking that step back and doing that CQI process and making sure that you're implementing as intended. Program drift is that thing that happens, and I'll just use an example that probably all of you can relate to. When you start up a new program or a new service, right? You've got to train staff. You've got to teach them what you're doing, how you're doing it. And usually in those initial days, we're super thoughtful about that. We make sure everybody gets through all the training, that they understand what they're supposed to be doing, what that's supposed to look like, all of that, right? And then we get up and running. Awesome. So now we're up and running. Oh, but Susie's going to leave and she's gotten another great job. Awesome for Susie, right? So now we need to bring somebody in to replace Susie. And so here comes Joanne. Joanne comes in to replace Susie, but we don't have the time to do the kind of training we did for Susie because we've already got clients, right? We've already got things moving, things are going. And so we're gonna kind of throw Joanne in. We'll get her the training maybe, but it's gonna happen in increments over time. And in the meantime, she's gonna have to be dealing with clients. Does that sound familiar to anybody? So that is an example of program drift. There's no way that you can expect Joanne to produce the same outcomes that Susie did because they didn't get the same training. They didn't get the same sort of introduction into what it was supposed to look like and how it's supposed to happen. And so that is a piece that we've just got to be super conscious of, right? We've got to understand. And so if we're monitoring for all these pieces, we know how, maybe crucial that initial training is and how it might impact our outcomes. In addition to, helping to avoid program drift, using a program manual also helps us with replicability. So you've got a really successful program into Cobb County and you want to move it to another county. If you've got a strong program manual, if you understood implementation and how that works, that's going to make that replicability in that other county much easier. It's going to make it more likely to happen because you have this good sort of roadmap to get you there and to keep you going on the same path. And the other piece is the sustainability. And those are words that we hear a lot in the work that we do and should absolutely not be taken lightly because without a doubt, 100%, that sustainability piece is a piece that needs to happen in order for us to move forward. And we will have key staff changes, right? Whether it's the program supervisor, maybe your agency director, maybe it's your head home visitor. Whoever it might be, you're going to have staff turnover. And if we're not using this sort of model to do effective operation, that sustainability is a piece that's going to suffer over time. So I'm going to pause here. I do have a question around the program manual. The worksheet related to policies and procedures, can it be sent out to all of us? Absolutely. I'll be happy to provide that to Abby and Julie, and they can send it out when they send the slides. No problem. So are there any other questions over sort of those pieces that we've covered so far? Okay, so I don't see any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and keep us moving and go to the next piece. And this next piece is, why should I care about fidelity? And in case I haven't already given you all the reasons you need, I want to talk a little bit about this piece. Measuring your outcomes and then measuring fidelity is important. So why? I've said that, I don't know, probably 10 times already. Because if you begin to see bad outcomes, if you're not measuring for both those things, you won't know what your bad outcomes are about. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if you are implementing with low fidelity, in other words, you're not doing what you intended and you're seeing poor outcomes, you might not know why. But if you are measuring for fidelity and you start to you start to see bad outcomes and you're not implementing the way it was intended, you probably have an implementation problem, not a program fit problem. But you can't answer this question unless you're monitoring for both of those things. So oftentimes we'll come in, we'll be seeing problems with outcomes, and what we got to have is those two pieces of the puzzle. Oftentimes we don't. So what folks have to do is basically kind of continue doing what they're doing and then add in that piece of evaluation that we don't have so that we can then answer, is an implementation problem or is an effectiveness problem? Because what we know is if you are monitoring for fidelity and everything's going there exactly like we expected it to look, but we're still seeing poor outcomes, then we know that that program is just not a good fit for the outcomes that you've identified for your particular target population for whatever piece of that puzzle. And so that's why this piece is, crazy crucial. And so I'll tell you what we're going to talk about next time is how do you do that program adherence, program fidelity piece. I'm going to walk you through putting together a measurement tool to make that happen. And how do you design that? What might that look like? So that's going to be like a really crucial piece of the part that we're going to talk about in February on our next piece. So we are going to help you get there. We just didn't have time to do everything today, right? So we will that. And in the meantime, what I want you to do is really think about the program that you've got and what you're seeing happen and identify those one or two changes that we had talked about earlier in our conversation. What are those one or two things you really want to see different? One or two things that will be different for your families as a result of participating within this piece of the puzzle. Okay? So now I'm going to bounce this and I'm going to see if anybody has any other questions. I know that there have been, I was going to just scroll back through. I think I've covered all the chat questions, but I want to see. Well, I did have an additional question around measurement tools and what other pieces are out there to measure outcomes, maybe in addition to the PFS. And I will tell you that is going to be one of those pieces that we are going to talk about next time. And if in the meantime you'd like to have a conversation, please feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, here in a couple, I think I have like 2 or 3 more slides. And my contact information is there on that last piece. And I'm happy to work through and think through those pieces with you about that. Because, the measurement tool is incredibly important. If you've got a tool that isn't directly related to your outcomes, you're not going to be able to show that change. So really important. So questions, comments, anything that as I'm beginning to put together that content for our time together in February, because I've of course begun on it, but I haven't finished it up. I wanted to make sure that we're meeting you guys' needs. So now's your time to say, hey, I need, it looks like something. I kept thinking about changing what they're requiring for evaluation. And, honestly, I'm going to let Abby or Julie take that question.
Hi, Edie. This is Abby. I won't say that there's any changes planned at this moment. We're always looking at, is what we're utilizing to evaluate our programs the best thing that we can be utilizing? And so I will say no, not specifically but it is always something that we're considering. I do have one other item that I want to throw out before we get to the very end of the webinar. In order to have a record that you've attended this webinar, because this is a required webinar for ICAP grantees. So if you are an ICAP grantee, you'll need to send me an email with your contract number. And then I just need one sentence on something useful or something new that you learned from attending this webinar. And then I will mark you off as having attended. If you're attending on behalf of multiple contracts, then you can just put all of the contracts in there and send one email. And I will type that in the chat box as well. I did see a couple more questions that I'll go ahead and answer. Are the webinars going to be recorded and available if we can't make the next one? Yes, we will record them. I did miss the first couple minutes of this one, but I got the vast majority of it. And then will there be any extra funds for purchasing measurement tools or assessments? At this time, I don't have a pot of money for additional evaluation costs. We do allow, if folks elected to utilize a different tool or assessment to do additional evaluation on their programs, that is something that would be allowable under ICAP grants. Edie, I'll let you answer the next one. Is it okay when we send out the slides? If we can send the notes as well?
Yeah, sure. There's notes attached to my slides, and I'll just be really honest. Sometimes I follow this fairly closely, and other times I diverge. But I think today I did pretty good about sort of, quote unquote, sticking to the script. But I'm happy to. They're welcome to see the PowerPoint in its true form, and see the notes that go along with that for sure. So we've Abby got a request that you repeat your directions for documenting their attendance.
Okay. You'll need to email me, and I just put my email in the chat box. Include your contract number and a sentence about one thing you learned today, or what was the most important thing or most useful thing that you learned in today's webinar. I just need a sentence, the contract number or numbers, thank you, and then what you learned or took away from today's training.
And then do CAP grantees need to send something to Laura, or should all of that go to you, Abby? Do CAP grants need to worry about that, or is it
CAP
just
grantees don't need to do anything.
Okay. Good deal. Well, we've covered lots of housekeeping questions, and so we want to make sure if anybody has any other content questions. Excellent. So while we're sort of waiting on that, I'm going to go ahead and scroll to the next slide, which talks a little bit about next time. Like I said, fidelity measurement is definitely something we're going to cover. I've got some really useful tools and hints on how to create a fidelity measurement if one doesn't exist for the program that you implement. And that is also sort of really non-threatening, super simple to get started with. We're also going to talk about those outcome selection and how that sort of relates to your measurement tools. I didn't put that on here, but definitely how outcome selection and measurement tool sort of matches together. And to make sure that those outcomes that you select for measurement do relate to that tool. And so we can talk about how that is a fit or a good fit around the protective factor survey, since I know lots of you use that. I can make sure I'm diving into that specifically. And then we're also going to begin to talk about how do you use that data on the work that you do and help you make decisions with regards to that data. What time is the webinar on February 12th? Awesome. Abby's going to send that out following today's call. She'll send the information around those pieces. And then, Abby, as soon as we get off, I'll send you that program manual worksheet that I had referred to. And you can send that out in addition to the slides. I didn't make any change from when I sent them to you the other day, but I can send those again. So
Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So that's the end, guys. And there is my contact information. There's my email address as well as my phone number. I'll be really honest with you. Email is much easier to get a hold of me. I travel a lot, and so I'm not always in the office. But feel free to reach out either way. And I want to thank you guys for taking time with us today. Really, really appreciate your interaction. I know that sometimes these remote sessions can be challenging, and so I appreciate you sort of jumping in and jumping on there. We have about 10 minutes left, and I'm happy to first off give you 10 minutes back in your day. But I'm also happy to hang out if you have questions. If you want to unmute and jump in and have a conversation with me, more than happy to stay on the line and have those conversations too. So, Abby, did you have anything else you need to make sure we cover?
I just wanted to say thank you. And I've had a couple emails pop up in the bottom right part of my screen. And so far, there's been a lot of positive feedback. So thank you for talking with us and taking the time today, Edie.
Absolutely. Yeah, everybody stay safe and warm in Iowa, guys. All right. Well, if I'm going to go ahead and hang out on the line for a few minutes, basically till everybody else is either gone or has the opportunity to ask questions. So if you feel like you're done, please feel free to disconnect. But if you want to stay on and have either a chat conversation or an actual discussion, you can unmute and we can do that.
I'm not seeing anything else on the chat box, Edie.
Yeah, I'm not either. And the funny thing is we've got lots of people hanging on. I think they were waiting to see if other people had questions because they wanted to see what they were.
I don't want to miss any questions.
Yeah, I don't think so. So excellent. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. And we will, get together soon. Hope most of you guys can join us again on February 12th. For us to continue some of this conversation. And Abby, in the meantime, if you hear it as they're emailing you, if you get any feedback about what would be helpful on that conversation, please feel free to share that with me, and I'll do my best to integrate any of those suggestions or requests in.
All right, so thank you. Okay. I only see a couple that are still hanging on. So I think we can probably go ahead and shut down. I think I'll go have Allie
turn us off. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Edie.
Good deal. Thanks, Abby. Bye, Julie.